Magnesium, magnesium, magnesium. You may have heard me post about it. I've definitely done a bunch of stories on it. I actually dedicated a whole show on Heal Thyself to it. It's the only mineral I've ever done a show on because magnesium is everything. Bone health, heart health, blood pressure, heart rhythm, brain health, brain function, diabetes, migraines, PMS, insomnia, you name it, magnesium is involved in it. It's actually involved in 500 to 600 different reactions in the body. Every system, every organ, every tissue, every cell needs magnesium. You heard me talk about heart rate variability before, a very important concept on the show. And it's a measurement of how well we're handling stress. And it's an important number to follow because it can tell us overall how much stress is beating us up, but also how much we're in parasympathetic. That's the rest and digest versus that sympathetic mode, that fight or flight. 2016 randomized controlled trial out of Germany. One group had a daily supplement of 400 milligrams of magnesium. The other group had the placebo. After 90 days of intervention, the magnesium group had better heart rate variability, better vagus nerve activity that's important for handling stress and communicating stress through the body, and they were more in the parasympathetic mode. So important for overall physical stress, but also the mental and emotional stress that we have every single day. And this is why I talk about magnesium every single day, and this is why I take magnesium myself as a supplement every single day. The one that I take is by BioOptimizer's Magnesium Breakthrough. Here's why. It's a complete formula. Includes all the naturally derived forms of magnesium, all 7 different types, doesn't contain any synthetic additives or preservatives. You know it's so important for me and how I talk about this. No chemical derivatives at all. The purest of the pure. And when you couple this with a consistent routine of yoga or meditation or creating rituals around your life and utilizing the magnesium, then you're going to have a daily dose of something that is keeping you in better health overall and keeping you from becoming overly stressed, physically, mentally, and emotionally. So you're going to have more calm thoughts, less reaction, less impulsivity, and more just overall flow, right? That physical and mental relaxation that we need to be navigating our day through. Try this out. Try Magnesium Breakthrough by BioOptimizers for at least 30 days and let me know if it makes a difference, right? Shoot me a DM. I'll answer. I want to hear about it. So today for Heal Thyself listeners, you're going to get 10% off with the Heal Thyself coupon code when you visit biooptimizers.com/DRG and enter the code DRG10. That's BIOPTIMIZERS.com/DRG. And the coupon code, again, is DRG10. So try that out. Pick up one of the magnesiums. Try for 30 days. Reach out and let me know how it works for you. All right, Newsest. Check this out. I recently did a whole audit on the full line or most of the protein powders that are out there. And we looked deep into their certificates of analysis, looking at heavy metals, pesticides, microbes. And as you may or may not be aware of, Newsest was one of the only top three that made it. And why? It's really important to know what's going in your body, especially if you're using it every single day, especially if your wife is pregnant or you're pregnant or your kid is having this. So important. Now, Newsest is a brand that offers transparency. They share their independent testing, which is already an awesome sign if a company's doing this. Newsest Protein offers the peace of mind. Why? Because they're regularly testing for soy, dairy, heavy metals, pesticides, herbicides. Their peas are grown in northern France and processed in Belgium, and they use a patented water-based technology. The Clean Lean Protein, which is a benchmark for the clean label or free-form supplements overall, is one of the highest grade proteins out there, period. So for Heal Thyself listeners, you're going to get 20% off your first purchase. You're going to go to newzest.us/heal thyself. That's NUZEST.us/HEALTHYSELF. All right, everyone, welcome to the newest episode of Heal Thyself. Thank you for joining the show, taking the time out of your week, of your day. Really, it's a blessing, and I'm so grateful that you are all putting yourself in a place to learn more, to change yourself, to change your community, your families, and society, all with just some information that is teaching you how to empower yourself. All right. Today's show, really important. How many of y'all eat hummus? How many of you love hummus? How many of you go to a barbecue or a football game or a family gathering and there's hummus there? Well, something important for us to know, and hummus can be a really staple for a lot of us, especially vegans. We need to know what is the problem with conventional hummus, because there is a problem, and I'm going to talk about it, and how do we optimize? Which ones are the best hummuses out there? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in the product review. And then a very special guest. I have been waiting for so long to talk about the place of psychedelic medicine when it comes to healing depression, suicidal thoughts, anxiety, anything that has to do with the mental emotional component. How can it improve? And this is something that is taboo, but we have one of the foremost medical doctors talking about it. Dr. Molly Maloof is going to go into how psychedelics may be a game changer for mood issues, for our health overall. So can't wait to get her on. So without further ado, let's get to this hummus knowledge bomb. All right, who loves hummus? I love hummus. I've eaten hummus almost all my life. It's something that my palate enjoys. I put carrots in there. I put a little celery in there. Sometimes I'll put it on a spread. I love dipping some really good healthy chips or chips that are not cooked in safflower oil, canola oil, just some really good healthy stuff. I'll use hummus. And hummus, for many people, is thought of as a health food. And it is, but there are some issues. Now, I want to talk about some research that came from the Environmental Working Group. And this is a nonprofit that you've heard me speak about on so many different shows. And they wrote a great article. And it said the EWG tests for hummus and finds high levels of glyphosate, the weed killer. This is an article by Dr. Alexis Temkin and toxicologist Olga Nadenko. And both of them led an investigation, and this was done, I think it was around last summer where this investigation was done. And what they did was basically look at hummus and look at the problem with most conventional hummuses. Now, as I mentioned before, hummus was focused on because there's a problem with hummus. And the problem is in chickpeas. And what's the problem with chickpeas? In particular, glyphosate. It's a toxic weed killer sold under Monsanto formerly, right? And now it's Bayer, which not coincidentally, dietitians out there, food scientists on Instagram out there, they're deeming it safe. And yes, but the problem is they're ignoring the research, explaining how it affects our gut bacteria, and in particular, before I go into anything, the Monsanto papers. And I did a whole show called the Monsanto Documents, right? And essentially what it is explaining and showing and revealing that the company in itself admittedly knows that glyphosate is not safe. So I'm going to do a little summary of the 10 things we learned about those declassified documents from the same company that is saying, yes, glyphosate is safe for everyone. 1, we learned that they violated peer-reviewed study standards and avoided publication of a study that's showing that glyphosate is toxic to your cells. 2, they covertly manipulated and purposefully non-disclosed any data showing that glyphosate is toxic to the body, and they covered up those conflicts of interest in the studies. They had an intention to pay one particular guy, his name's Wallace Hayes, an editor of Food and Chemical Toxicology, in order to give him and have him make a pro-glyphosate stance. And guess what? We learned that they paid him off. It's so crazy. Also, details on how big of a role Monsanto played in the retraction of studies that are showing that glyphosate is toxic to our cells. I got a few more before we go into the hummus, but admission of them leveraging relationships to retract studies that showing glyphosate is toxic. One in particular was super egregious. They added names of experts to Monsanto written studies. Monsanto wrote the studies, added names of experts. Now dietitians and food scientists are reading that studies and taking at face value saying glyphosate is safe. This is how poor critical thinking is at this point. None of us ask questions anymore. Another really damning one, they ghostwrote papers to show that no, there was no carcinogenic potential of glyphosate, meaning that they're saying it doesn't cause cancer when it does. Email showing that Monsanto paid multiple individuals on an expert panel to take a pro-glyphosate stance. Never submitting studies to the EPA showing that glyphosate causes cancer in mice. And lastly, Monsanto scientists' emails uncovering, explaining how cancer-causing or carcinogenic glyphosate is in humans and that there is a known mechanism. Unbelievable, because they denied that there's any of this happening, but they literally show in these emails within Monsanto that there is a known mechanism and they know exactly how glyphosate causes cancer. Roundup, right? Crazy stuff. So we see they admit to data manipulation. They admit to these surfactants in Roundup being a hormone disruptor and causing cancer. So glyphosate is a problem. I don't care what anyone says until proven otherwise, all right? It's been a problem, and people are accepting research at face value, and one, they're not recognizing or having any regard for these Monsanto papers where we learn from the company that this is the most toxic stuff out there, one of the most worst pesticides out there. And they're not looking into the authors who are writing the articles or their affiliations. You gotta follow the money always. This is critical thinking. Unfortunately, too many doctors out there, food scientists out there, dietitians out there are not critical thinkers. But for me, I don't trust anyone until I learn it myself. And that's the problem with research articles. Unfortunately, there's a lot of corruption out there. So as I mentioned, it happens when big industries are involved, like agriculture, dairy, sugar, conventional meat industry. They're all looking for shortcuts and profit with zero regard for human health. Remember that. So don't believe me. Start going down the rabbit hole yourself, and you're going to learn more about this. Well, with that said, we have a long way. We have a lot of checks and balances to do for research studies, but at this point, it's a science that we have. I do wish, though, there were a lot of evidence-based research studies that had honest and integrity approaches to it, but it's not. Or there was a third party checking for everything, but we don't have that yet. Now I digress from the hummus. We got to get back to the hummus. So before I go into what the environmental working group based their product review on and what the test looked like, I want you to understand what this was. According to the authors, what happened was there was 43 conventional and non-organic chickpea and chickpea-based samples tested. More than 90% had detectable levels of that chemical, glyphosate, that I was just talking about. Over 1/3 of the 33 conventional hummus samples exceeded the environmental working group's health-based benchmark for daily consumption, based on a 60-gram serving of hummus. That's 4 tablespoons. One sample of hummus had nearly 15 times as much glyphosate as the benchmark that the environmental working group uses. And one of the 2 tests from a sample of the conventional dry chickpeas exceeded even EPA's level of standard that is permissible for us. Interesting, because this is being sold. You buy it. You may give it to your kids. Your wife may be pregnant. You may be pregnant. And you're eating this. It's a problem. This is why I'm doing this show, for us to learn that hummus could be a problem. So the environmental working group also tested 12 samples of organic hummus and 6 samples of organic chickpeas. Most contain glyphosate. But the thing is, at much lower levels for organic. It's interesting because organic shouldn't contain glyphosate, but they still found some. And that shows how pervasive and ubiquitous it's everywhere. So according to the study, the samples were taken from Aldi, Costco, Giant, Harris Teeter, Safeway, ShopRite, Target, Trader Joe's, Walmart, and Whole Foods. All right, so I got you at the edge of your seat. I'm sorry. Let's get into the product review so we can find out which hummuses we gotta buy and which ones we gotta stay away from. All right, product review time. Let's go into the top 10 most pesticide-tainted hummuses out there. Mind you, before we do, the Environmental Working Group's health benchmark for glyphosate in hummus is 160 parts per billion. It's strict. And here at Heal Thyself, we love strict because, as I mentioned on a recent show, FDA, EPA, USDA ain't 100% about consumer health, right? There's so many loopholes, and we know this because there's vast differences in the toxins in our food and cosmetics and personal care products and home air quality. A lot of countries are making an effort to do right by their people, so they're banning a lot of that crap. But over here, there's so many loopholes. We're one of the worst countries with it by far. But we see a lot of these toxins that are banned in other countries are just regular here. They're coming through a very porous regulatory body, and these organizations like the EPA, FDA, and USDA are turning blind eyes. So remember, that's why we always go by strict benchmarks, because the stricter the better, and a lot of these should be banned in the first place. All right, here are the hummuses that you need to be looking out for, with the first one that I'm mentioning being the worst. Now remember, EWG level, where they're concerned, is over 160 parts per billion. Keep that number in mind. The worst offender, Whole Foods Market Original Hummus, with 2,379 parts per billion. Incredible. Then the next 2 and 3 are Harris Teeter Fresh Foods Market. They have the traditional artisan hummus, both over 1,000. Then there's the Sabra, which is super popular across the board. I've eaten Sabra before. The classic hummus, conventional. None of these are organic. 476 for one, 743. The other offenders that we see here, all over 160 parts per billion, are going to be Whole Foods. Whole Foods again. Sabra, we see the roasted pine nut hummus, the supremely spicy one by Sabra. Haig's Delicacies, a spicy hummus, 330. That's the overall level on that one. And those are the top 10, right? So we have some Sabra, some Whole Foods, some Haig's, but all of them are going to be at least double, with the Whole Foods being really high. Crazy, right? Because for us, in our mind, we're thinking Whole Foods is the safest. But you see that Whole Foods can be greenwashed in many, many ways also, which is again bringing to us the importance of eating organic when it comes to some very particular foods like hummus. So let's get into the top best hummuses. All right, we're going to go from ascending order. So Good and Gather, Simple Truth Organic, Park Street Deli, Ithaca Cedars, original, the organic one, Whole Foods Organic. That's the one we have to look for. Asmar's Organic, O Organics, and the Perfect Pita Organic. These had non-detectable all the way up to, I think the max was 8 or 10 parts per billion. So what we know is that most of these are going to be organic, minus the Good and Gather, Ithaca, and Asmar's, as well as Perfect Pita. Most of the others are going to be organic, like the O Organics, the Whole Foods one, the Cedars, the Simple Truth. So it's a mix of organic and conventional for the top ones. And it's just interesting because a lot of the ones that were the worst were mostly conventional, but some of the best ones, there was some conventional ones in there. So it's, unless you're following these conventional ones and you prefer conventional hummus, I would just go with organic to be safe, because as a rule of thumb, most organic hummus is going to have fairly low or non-detectable levels of glyphosate. And as a bonus, look, for me, there's something to be said about making hummus on your own, but if you are going to do it, you want to use either canned or dried beans before. Now, I will have something to say about canned. Canned, there always runs a risk of BPA because of the lining of the can. So for dry, here are the best ones. And actually, none of these are chickpeas. Here's the best beans for dry in general. Signature Select. That's a conventional one. The lentils, Signature Select pinto beans, that's conventional. Goya, which is what my family grew up on, conventional Great Northern beans. Harris Teeter Organic black turtle beans, and Harris Teeter conventional navy beans. All of these were under 10 parts per billion for glyphosate. So interestingly enough, these dried ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, like 4 out of the 5 are going to be conventional. So if you're getting dried beans, if you go with any of these brands, then you can bet on them being safe. But I still would usually go with the organic ones. And lastly, here are the canned ones. The 3 that had non-detectable levels of glyphosate were the best one being Goya black beans, Bush's Great Northern beans, and Bush's black beans. But again, this is canned beans, so it does run the risk of having BPA as an adulterant. So here's what I'll do. Let's summarize this up. If I'm going to a party and I want to bring hummus, for the regard of myself and my friends or my family, I'm going to get organic hummus as a rule of thumb. There are some conventional hummuses, as the ones I mentioned, that do have non-detectable levels. But for me, I'm not going to remember those names. I'm going to remember just organic tends to be much better a case for hummus not being adulterated with conventional or with glyphosate. I would not usually get canned beans. If I do eat beans, they're going to be dried, and I'm going to make them myself. And we do learn that some of the dried beans can be conventional. So it's up to you. But what I wanted to do is put the information out there that really, when we think something is safe just because it's at Whole Foods, that's not necessarily the case, because we see Whole Foods hummus, conventional version of it, being one of the worst offenders of density of glyphosate that we give to ourselves, we give to our loved ones, pregnant women, and children. All right. So if you're on a budget here, though, you do have some choices. So I really hope that helped. Can't wait to get Molly on. Can't wait to, this is a big part of a big part of the intrigue for me as a doctor and a healer has to do with how do we get to the root causes? How do we express trauma? How do we get in touch with those traumas? And I think psychedelics has a major, major role in the future of health. And we're blessed to have one of the leading voices on here. So as she stands on deck, get ready to have a really, really awesome conversation. All right, what a special guest today. Dr. Molly flew out from Illinois to come here on the show and do other things, but I like to think she came for the show. What an amazing, amazing doctor. Here's why. For the first time ever on the show, we're going to get into the talk of psychedelic medicine. How helpful is it for us? What's the data behind it? Is it safe? Is it effective? What's happening in the future? This is the person who knows it all, and I'm so excited to have it on. She's a renegade. She's rebellious, just like Doc G. And she is a Renaissance woman. I say all the R's because that's what she is. and amazing and wonderful. And I'm so happy to have you here. I tried to hype you up as best as possible.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, but the introduction, look, your reputation precedes you, and here's why. I was a fan of your work before you came here. So I feel like a little starstruck because
oh my gosh.
Now I join your clubhouses and I listen on Fridays, the Psychedelic Club Hour.
The Psychedelic News Hour,
News Hour. And it's incredible the information you're putting out there. You are one of the leading voices in the psychedelic movement, something that I've been supportive of for quite a while. But I have so many questions for you. First of all, how did you get into this space? In the conventional world of going through school, I know that you didn't have a class on psychedelics. How did you get into this space?
So it's funny because I'm looking behind here at this thing that says Heal Thyself. And actually, I was really interested in education in medical school. I actually designed a course called Physician Heal Thyself. And I was always passionate about health and what is health about? How do you optimize it? How do you improve it? And residency, honestly, almost broke me because I thought that I could change the system from within. And then I realized that that was impossible. Yeah. And so we were feeding kids cake and candy that had cancer. And I was like, okay, you're just ignoring first principles here of how cancer grows. And how come no one cares about nutrition? And so I decided to do something fairly ridiculous and resign from my residency and start my own medical practice and get my license and start working with executives in Silicon Valley because I saw that technology at the time, I thought it was going to change everything. And so I was like, okay, that's where I'll go next. And I spent about 8 years in the tech scene. And as we know, technology has changed our lives, maybe for better, maybe for worse. Yeah. I mean, here I am wearing a Garmin Vivo Smart and an Oura Ring. And like, I usually wear a continuous glucose monitor. And I spent a long time studying metabolism. I ended up teaching at Stanford. They asked me to teach a course on health. And I was like, I'll teach a course on Healthspan because everyone's talking about lifespan, but I'm interested in how do we live better longer. And when I started studying metabolism a few years ago and really getting into like the underlying reasons why people were getting sick, it almost always came down to so many people have unresolved stress and trauma in their lives, right? So many people have had terrible life experiences that they've just swept under the rug. And honestly, like stress is one of the leading causes of people going to the doctor. And I think that psychedelics are going to play a very important role in helping us master the stress response and helping us actually master trauma better than we have in the past because we know that traumatic experiences really change our body and our brain. We know that adverse childhood experiences increase your risk for chronic disease, but we haven't really found solutions for a lot of problems that we know are stress-related, we know that are chronic stress-related or post-traumatic stress-related. And so I was like, wow, like psychedelics are definitely going to play a role in this, and I need to be a part of this movement because in the back rooms of Silicon Valley, in these boardrooms, I was like talking to doctors and talking to executives and saying like, look, I think psychedelics are important. And really early on, everyone kind of thought I was a little bit crazy for saying stuff like that. But eventually in like 2017, I came out of the closet, psychedelic closet. I was like, all right, I got on stage at a talk. Amazon had this like startup headquarters on Market Street. And I started interviewing this guy, James Fadiman, who was like the pioneer of microdosing. And I was like, oh shit, I'm talking about psychedelics in the media in front of a bunch of people. The room was packed. And I was like, I can't believe and after, because they almost kicked us out, basically. Like they were like, you should probably like stop this talk right now because you guys are talking about illegal substances. And we were like, come on, just let us finish the talk. And so we basically go and we like finish the talk. And then I had this whole crowd of people like, hey, who are you? What are you about? What is this? What are you talking about? Microdosing. And I ended up getting interviewed by the Financial Times. And then I was like, well, I'm certainly out of closet now because I've got a picture of my face in a magazine that's like, this doctor thinks psychedelics are helping people, you know. And I was really mostly talking about how I saw executives using them before they were going to pitch meetings, and they were using it for performance enhancement. And so there was this sort of like script being flipped around psychedelics. And through those communities of executives and investors and entrepreneurs that I worked with, a lot of money got raised for MAPS. And MAPS is a nonprofit pharmaceutical company, by the way. So like, there's a lot of good that has come out of Silicon Valley, including the psychedelic revolution, I would say, that's got sort of it re-sparked through this group. And then also, frankly, I've spent a lot of time at Burning Man. So I've been like 9-year burner. And yeah, I kind of got this reputation of just being this like doctor who did whatever she wanted and got away with it.
Yeah.
So knock on wood. Hopefully
knock on wood. Yeah, knock on wood.
Get away with things because I think I've always been positioning myself and my brand is like, how do we reduce harm and optimize good as much as possible?
Yeah.
And how do we optimize health instead of just fix sickness? Because like, I think it's great that we have psychedelics for hopefully curing things like PTSD and trauma and all sorts of conditions. But I'm also just a believer that there's a role for them in like spirituality. There's a role for them in community. There's a role for them in many different ways. And like medicine is one big way that's changing the storyline for modern people.
Oh, I love it. I'm already hyped up from this conversation because I align so much with what you said, particularly with the technology, because I lived in Silicon Valley myself.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, is this for better or for worse? Because there's a lot of like health-based technologies out there. And I'm like, whoa, people are going to have access to everything. But at the end of the day, it's also us being glued to our phone over and over, and how are we getting back to nature? It's interesting because in my time in Silicon Valley is when I started getting into psychedelics. How did that happen? You mentioned James Fadiman. I was at a pharmacy called Pharmaca.
Oh, wow. That's right.
I
remember this.
Remember that?
Yes.
It was in Menlo Park. And his wife was there, and I was talking to her, and I didn't know who the heck it was, but her dog, which growls at everyone, wasn't growling at me. It was actually coming like really close to me, like hesitant but close, and I started petting it softly, and she's like, oh my God, my dog doesn't... She's like, you have to meet my husband. I was like, really? Your husband? Why your husband? And then she comes back with him, signed book, and gives it to me, and I read it. And that opened my eyes. And then I went into the Harvard Psychedelics book. And then I was like, oh my God, is there a place for this in medicine? Simultaneously learning more about MAPS and understanding, whoa, there's a lot going on here that I didn't know about, because my association is like every American association.
The underground, rave culture.
Rave culture, whoa, like this is a party
dangerous,
drug.
You're going to jump out of a window and hurt yourself. Like
Exactly.
And everyone has someone they know that like went off the deep end from some terrible drug experience. And the unfortunate thing is that like those are definitely the minority.
Yeah.
Like the vast majority of people who use psychedelics don't really abuse them. Like they're not really addictive substances.
Yeah.
And mushrooms alone are like, the research basically suggests that they're the least dangerous of all the drugs that are out in the street right now. And cigarettes, far more dangerous. And frankly, a lot of legal drugs that we prescribe as doctors are super dangerous.
Yeah.
Like all the opioids that have killed hundreds of thousands of people, and we've legally prescribed them. So I think everyone's just waking up and getting it. And frankly, I'm just like astonished at the pharmaceutical industry just blowing up in Canada and in America.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing, and it's also like a very like, no offense, but like most of the people running these companies are just old white dudes.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, it's the same thing all over again. We're going to like ruin these things. So hopefully we can avoid that. And so I decided I was going to get involved in the industry, and I was going to learn about every facet of it. I was going to see what was going on in culture. I was going to see what was going on in pharma. I was going to see what doctors were actually doing. I actually started my own sublingual ketamine protocol, and I'm in this ketamine Google group on it's like a Google group, it's online, and it's like just all these doctors talking about their practices with ketamine assisted therapy, and they're all basically waiting for more medicine to come to market that they can legally prescribe and administer. So there's actually this huge wave of doctors that are like converting their practices into psychedelic medicine. I think it's actually a return to shamanism in our culture in a really big way. And the doctors that are doing this, the vast majority of them that are in this group are like the really good ones. Like they're the really good doctors. Now there are bad apples out there that are overprescribing, and there's certainly plenty of ketamine mills that like basically you just go in and get shot up and then you walk out.
Yeah.
That's not ideal. We don't want that. That's not really what people need. People need to actually connect with people. They need to have their stories heard. They need to have their traumas expressed. They need to work through them with a therapist, preferably, and not just go and get, numbed. Like that's not helping things.
Yeah. We're going to get into it all. I want to talk about psilocybin. I want to talk about ketamine. I want to talk about MDMA, because these are things that are really being put into the scientific literature.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see that how helpful it is for things like PTSD, anxiety, depression, stuff. I mean, especially I was astonished by looking at ketamine and saying, whoa, like we're talking about people with depression, lifelong
depression,
and going through these ketamine assisted therapies. And what do you mean they're coming out?
I mean, for suicide alone, it should be approved. Like literally someone should get ketamine approved specifically for, if you are suicidal, you go and get a ketamine infusion, because it can take you off the ledge. And like that, I know so many people who've killed themselves in the last year.
Wow.
And like, they weren't my personal friends, but everyone I know knows someone who killed themselves this last year. And so we've had this epidemic of suicide and despair deaths, right? And arguably all these homicides and mass shootings are despair deaths, because these are people that are murdering others because they are in complete despair. And they're usually very mentally ill and disconnected from community. And many of them have never had any love in their entire life. And so it's really a problem. Like our whole culture needs healing. And I think that this movement is coming at the perfect time because we just finished a pandemic almost. It's an endemic now. And I think everyone's like, whoa, what did I just experience? I mean, the number of doctors that have actually described having PTSD after this last year is astonishing.
Yeah.
It's a high percentage.
Wow.
So even like all of those doctors need this kind of care.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And like these are breakthrough therapies, right? So MDMA and psilocybin have been designated by the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, or the Food and Drug Administration, as breakthrough therapies, which means they are better than what we have right now for treatment-resistant depression, for PTSD. So like they're like trying to fast track these because they're like, we don't have other options that work as well.
No.
So that's a pretty big deal. Like and then now the question is what's going to happen when Compass Pathways has their version of, psilocybin, and what's going to happen to all the mushrooms on the street? Or what's going to happen with the decriminalization movement? Yeah. Like, is the DEA going to go hard on people growing mushrooms? Like, I don't know the answer to that. I do know that a lot of these are still very much illegal. And even if they were to get scheduled, like what will happen likely is there's going to be like dual scheduling usually. Unless these get like federally decriminalized, what will happen with pharmaceutical drugs is when you get a drug approved for an indication, when that's prescribed by a doctor through the system, it's usually like a Schedule 3. Because that's considered to be a drug that is approved. Mm-hmm. Now, if it's like, for example, GHB. So I learned all about GHB like 8 years ago when I was writing a paper for this, this venture capitalist, and he wanted to know about it. So I wrote this history of this drug, and long story short, like GHB gets approved by this company, Jazz Pharmaceuticals, and Jazz Pharmaceuticals is like a multi-billion-dollar company for one drug that treats a very rare disease called narcolepsy, cataplexy. Yeah. And so this company got it dual scheduled. So if you buy GHB from your local drug dealer, it's going to be Schedule 1. But if you get GHB from your doctor, it's Schedule 3. And the reason why is because the stuff on the street is usually pretty messy and dirty. Mm-hmm. It's got all sorts of stuff in it. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't stay GHB easily. Like GHB tends to break down into what's called GBL. So why pharmaceutical companies and why the FDA likes pharmaceutical companies and likes approved drugs is because they've done all this research to basically show that this is the right dose, these are the side effects, this is what happens when you take it, these are the biggest risks, and like they know because they've done controlled trials. Right. And that's why these things get special treatment. And that's why these companies become billion-dollar companies, because they've done all this research. And this research costs millions of dollars and takes many years. So even though we're in the beginning of this revolution, like MDMA will come next, and then psilocybin will be after that. But there's going to be a whole host of other drugs that are going to come to market that are going to be, based on these families. Wow. And I'm seeing indications like people looking for solutions for autism, people looking for solutions for cluster headaches, people looking for solutions for all sorts of conditions that we don't have good solutions for. So yeah,
that's like the forefront. It seems pretty bright. Particularly because I think the consciousness is changing around it too. Yeah. Parents from the 60s, Yeah. My dad's like because I'm very open about him with what I do and why. Yeah. And, it's a little bit like, okay, just be very careful,
Totally.
Because that's the consciousness is shifting. But now as I speak to him about the research that's coming out that we see, it's much different now. It's not at the party, it's not at, at a festival or the park or, whatever.
Well, it's funny because I remember moving to Oakland in 2011. And I remember walking down the street and being like, whoa, there's all these dispensaries everywhere. This is a new world I'm living in. And I would tell my parents, and I would sneak home on Christmas break and bring them marijuana candy. And they would be like, oh my God, what do you have? Oh, let me try it. And then they would try it. And then they'd be like, this is awesome. And then one year I didn't bring something home, and they were like, you didn't bring any treats. And I was like, yeah, because you told me to stop. Yeah. So I was like, but now they're illegal everywhere. And so it's funny because now they're like, oh yeah, marijuana, no big deal. And I'm like, yeah, remember when I told you that 10 years before I even moved to Oakland that it was no big deal? Yeah, you didn't believe me then.
Yeah.
And so the same thing is happening with psychedelics, where like I talked to my parents about psychedelics. I'm like, hey, do you know this research is happening? And when they read about it in the Wall Street Journal in a front page art, like there's a whole article in the future of everything, they're like, Molly, what you're talking about, it's in the newspaper. And I was like, I know. And so it's funny because it's like they're getting it now. And that when I, I'm from Peoria, Illinois. So when I'm like hanging out with people in Peoria, Illinois, and like family friends are like, hey, so I'm interested in psychedelics. Where should I go? And I'm like, okay. When the Midwest is like curious about psychedelics, that means this is happening.
Yeah.
And like now there's like one ketamine infusion center in Central Illinois, and so it's and Field Trip opened an office in Chicago, so it's certainly spreading. It's definitely like we're in a moment for sure. Where it's a very exciting moment, but it's also like very much just so much that could happen.
For sure.
Yeah.
I know it can go different ways too.
Yeah.
So let's get into the specifics and of each one. I really want to, I want, because there's people right now listening and viewing who never heard of this stuff.
Wow.
So you got to understand we're in it, but this is sort of introductory.
Yeah.
First of all, what you mentioned ketamine, and you mentioned that it may be indicated for depression, suicidality.
Yeah.
Do we know how it works? What happens in the brain?
Oh my God, ketamine is such a weird drug. Okay, so the weirdest thing about a lot of modern medicine is that it was actually derived from battlefield medicine, and ketamine is no exception. So ketamine was highly used in Vietnam because it would give you what's called conscious sedation. So after someone got their arm blown off and they needed to do like field medicine, they would give people ketamine, and then you basically get into this like disassociated state. And so it's also a pain reliever, right? So it's got a dissociative effect. It's got a pain relieving effect. So it's like an anesthetic, analgesic, antidepressant, and anxiolytic, which means it can make you not feel pain. It can change your consciousness. It can reduce your depression, and it can reduce your anxiety. So it's used for like all sorts of stuff, right? Like it can actually, and it's prescribed for a lot of these things out in the real world. It's used in anesthetics mostly, but there's, obviously a lot of use in depression now. And for people with anxiety, people are even prescribing it sublingually. Doctors are doing a lot of this stuff off-label because it's only technically approved for depression if you get this stuff called S-ketamine, which is an intranasal form that J&J made, which, by the way, is just so each chemical has like two things called isomers. And so what J&J did is they came along that said, ooh, we're going to take the L isomer and we're going to make S-ketamine. And everyone's like, cool, you made like an isomer. It's not that much different than the racemic ketamine. But they were able to patent this version. And so then they were able to get it approved. And now that it's approved, if you have a doctor who will prescribe it to you, you can go to their office and they can shoot it up your nose and you can have a disassociated experience with this medicine. It's extremely expensive. It's not covered by most insurance. And so it's still like, most doctors I know are like, yeah, it's great, but like you can literally get the exact same product, racemic ketamine, from a compounding pharmacist for way cheaper, for literally 10 times cheaper. So like there's not a lot of incentive for our doctors to go through all of the effort to fill out all the forms when you can get a very similar version of this that you can prescribe to a patient through a compounding pharmacy.
Right. Okay. And is it the dissociative effect that is dissociating you from the depressive episode?
It's actually an NMDA receptor antagonism. So depression is like a weird condition, right? And so some of it is inflammatory and some of it is, frankly, the result of chronic stress. So there's this neuroplasticity effect that happens when ketamine is consumed. And it actually involves the mTOR switch, which basically, it's kind of like a light switch turning on and off in the body, where you basically like the energy goes up and down, and then weirdly it's like the difference in energy potential that happens that sends the signal to the brain to produce more ATP to start sprouting more neural connections.
Okay.
That's the best way to describe it. It's
yeah,
really
it makes
hard.
sense. No, it's very clear.
It's tricky to describe, but I had to read all these papers. When I found that out, I was like, I knew there was a mitochondrial function. But so what it does is it increases this ability for your brain to form new connections. The way I describe it to the layman is like you're in the ditch and you're staring up from the ditch and you're in the corner in the ditch and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to get out of this ditch? This is impossible. And when you're depressed, like you are laying in bed and you can't imagine getting out of that bed because you're so miserable. You're so unhappy. You're low energy. Depression itself causes like a lower energy state because you're not moving so much. And if you don't move, then your batteries aren't being charged because your muscles literally need to move in order to be charged. So long story short, a person who's stuck in the ditch is like, I can't get out. I don't even know how to get out of the ditch. And then like ketamine's like, oh, I'm turning my brain back on and I can like think about this now and I can form new ways of thinking about how to get out of this situation.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to take the dirt from the side of the ditch and I'm going to build a staircase and there's a doctor up there and a therapist and they're going to pull me out. That's the way I describe it.
Yeah.
And that's why I recommend you don't just like try to dig yourself out of the ditch. You don't just take ketamine thinking that's going to fix you. The reality is that the reason why you got into the ditch is likely due to massive chronic stress combined with acute stress, combined with a lifestyle that's maladaptive to health, which we know most people are living in America.
Yeah.
So people aren't moving enough. People are not getting enough sunshine. People have been isolated for the last year. People are eating garbage.
Yeah.
Like all these things damage the health of your body, including the microbiome, which we know is a huge role in serotonergic signaling. And the vagus nerve has this back and forth crosstalk between the gut and the brain. So depression is just like, to me, a byproduct of our maladaptive lifestyles. And technically, it's considered an adaptive response to stress. It's like your body basically saying, I need to go into energy saving mode.
Right.
Because I can't really handle what's going on right now in the real world. Like I need to just like turn down all this activity because it's too much. And the problem is that is really detrimental because then you get stuck in this place where you're like, oh fuck, I have no energy. I can't move. I'm just so tired. And yeah, it sucks because a lot of people are there right now, you know?
100%. Yeah. I love that you mentioned adaptive response because we have to think about how the body works with nothing as a coincidence. The body adapting to stop you, right? To handle that stress, to integrate that stress.
Yeah.
But guess what? A lot of us are depressed, but then we drudge ourselves back to work and get more stress from work, right? Don't deal with the stuff from our childhood or teenagers. Don't talk to people. No community, social isolation.
No nature.
No nature. No sun. No
Yes.
movement. The basic things for Healthspan, right?
Yes.
That we were talking about. Okay, so now we got a little understanding of ketamine. I know there's in LA, there's a lot of ketamine-assisted therapies.
Yeah.
What about MDMA?
Yeah, MDMA is tricky. So I just got done taking it. I'm in the middle of an online course, like teaching me how to communicate about MDMA. So the way that I think about MDMA is like it extinguishes fear conditioning, right? Like that's one of the main reasons why it's so good for PTSD and any sort of like trauma is like when you think about that traumatic experience, immediately your body goes into this fear response, right? So it's really hard to get out of that response, especially if it's like baked into your brain function. So when you take MDMA and you're in the presence of a therapist who's like taking care of you and really talking to you and being present for you, and you're really breaking up your most intimate moments, the most frightening things that have ever happened to you, and you feel safe and connected and someone's empathizing with you, that changes the programming of that script in the brain. And so now you don't associate those thoughts with, I'm going to die, which if you've been to war and you think about going to war and you think about people, you know, who've died in front of you, like every time you think about that, it's like, boom, you're back there. So it really, MDMA's role is to like play a role in reprogramming the fear response. And I think that it's also just known as an empathogen, right? So it increases your feeling of connectivity and connection to someone else, which is necessary for that therapist and patient relationship to really be fertile and grow and be able to be in a place where you really trust them to tell them what you're afraid of. A lot of people don't find good therapists because they just don't trust people and they can't really open up. And if you can't open up and trust someone, then you'll never really work through your problems. So I'm just like, I can't. First of all, my nickname is Dr. Molly. And
I know,
so
I was just saying how perfect you came to this world with that name.
I just cannot wait to tell you guys about what I'm working on in this space. And it's like, I can't talk. I just signed a term sheet, so I can't talk about it until I really sign the term sheet. But let's just say that there is going to be a really exciting future ahead in this space. And I'm just like so lit up thinking about it because I'm putting together this program that's going to be so important for women. And I'm just going to leave it at that.
Well, you tell me and I'll bring it out.
I'll
the whole community. Yeah.
I'll come back. Yeah.
I'm ready for that. But it's so interesting to see the way these psychedelics work because MDMA, in my experience, is such an empathogen. I mean, you feel connected to community.
Totally.
You feel connected to yourself.
I know.
You close your eyes and you go, oh, God, why did I stop loving myself?
I know.
You know, you're like, oh, wow, I kind of love this about me, you know? And what an amazing way to get back in touch with who you are without like the filters of like, judgment and ego and all of the things that we've been programmed with.
Totally. Yeah.
So what a powerful medicine. Okay. But now we're going to get to the one that I really want to talk about. Psilocybin, which is my personal favorite.
Yeah. Same.
In the healing.
I'd say it's up there in the top 3.
Top 3.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so first of all, it has a long history throughout the world, ancestrally, shamanically, in medicine, and cultural revolution. Where do we stand right now as far as legalization of psilocybin?
Well, basically, it's just kind of a matter of time before most cities decide to decriminalize it. So right now, Denver, DC, probably soon to be Hawaii, and then Portland, and I think soon California and Oakland has already. They basically what they've done is decriminalized it, which means police are not going to arrest you in these cities if you're found with a small amount. Now, if you're in Austin, you will still be arrested. I know people who have been arrested in Austin for having mushrooms. So it's very much locally decided. But that doesn't mean that if you've got a big giant growing operation in one of these cities, that the DEA won't come in and stop you. That doesn't mean that the federal government won't come in and find you if you're selling a bunch of mushrooms. So like if you have a mushroom growing operation and you are found to be selling mushrooms in a decriminalized zone, you can still go to jail because it's technically still illegal federally. So that's the difference, right? It's like it's like you're not going to get in trouble probably for taking some mushrooms with your friends in these cities, but you're probably better off not going anywhere else. And if you really want to do mushrooms safely, you want to leave the country and go to like Jamaica or Costa Rica or Amsterdam where they're actually more legal. Or like there's I think Portugal might be too, but you really want to be just really much aware that like you could get in trouble, so you got to be careful.
That's a great way to put it because I think the decriminalization part, people are like, oh wow, we can just do a bunch of mushrooms in the street. So I don't.
Not really, not exactly.
It's a little shady right now.
And you're just better off. Like you're gonna have a better experience if you don't have to worry about getting arrested.
Exactly.
Which is why, like, I don't recommend you go do a bunch of mushrooms and run around the town. That's not smart. Like, so we should probably talk a little bit about how classical psychedelics work, right? So because we're already talking about mechanism of action.
For sure.
So like really the main gist, if you want to know about classical psychedelics, is that they kind of they basically turn off this default node. They don't really turn it off, but they change the functioning of your default mode network so that your brain is getting a lot more information coming in than it normally would. So typically there's this sort of gating mechanism in the thalamus. And when that gating mechanism is kind of designed to keep you from like taking in all the information that's happening in your environment. Because if you actually were to see everything that's actually happening in your environment all at once, it'd be really hard to function normally. But when you experience a psychedelic state, that gate's lifted, and so you get to experience this newfound connectivity of your brain. So all these parts of your brain are lighting up all at the same time that normally wouldn't be. And so that just changes the way that you perceive reality. And most people at a high enough dose, well, like I kind of describe it, there's different levels, right? So there's like the microdose, which is like 5 to 10 micrograms, milligrams in mushrooms, micrograms in LSD. And that's just going to make your day slightly more beautiful, right? But you're not going to see anything. Now, I call it like the museum dose, where it's like 25 milligrams of mushrooms, where you're like, you could be in public and nobody would know, but everything's gonna look a little bit glimmery. Like art's gonna look particularly more amazing. So like, I'm not recommending you go and do this at a museum because you may actually
get kicked out.
Some people may not. So the thing is, the reason why I'm always advocating for harm reduction and starting low and going slow and titrating up, which by the way, they do in these research studies. They start you on low doses in research studies, and then they bring you up to higher doses.
From microdose level or just low dose?
Usually
macro?
lower dose level in most of the research studies. I recommend just if you're ever new to anything, just microdose. Do not start with a giant handful of anything. That's dumb. So then there's like the concert dose, which is like 50 milligrams of mushrooms, right? And then you're like, you definitely feel physically your body is different. Like you can feel like you want to dance more, you want to move more. You're just like, everything is more beautiful and alive. And then when you start hitting a gram, that's when you start really tripping. Like most people will hallucinate with a gram of mushrooms. And now 3.5 grams, that's when you have got an eye mask on and you're with a therapist and you're in like a session where you are going inward. You really don't want to be in a group of people with 3.5 grams of mushrooms. That is like a clinical dose. Like that's like how much people are using in these studies, right? The equivalent essentially. And so I just think that most people get mushrooms all wrong because they just think that these pushers, these people who sell mushrooms are like, oh yeah, take like this much. And it's like, that is why people have bad experiences. That's why people get hurt. And by the way, like a lot of people don't even give themselves the proper education of like thinking, well, maybe I should ask my family if we have a family history of psychosis.
Right.
Maybe maybe I should do my own family history to make sure I'm not like at risk for like losing my mind. Or even if you have like mental illness, you should be talking to your doctor before you ever engage in any sort of recreational drug use, even and mostly just because they should know. And they're not going to get you in trouble. It's not like they're going to like arrest you. Like your doctor should know what you're taking if you're going to take something. Ideally, you can find a doctor who will actually listen to you and want to talk to you about these things. But the biggest problem with these drugs right now is that people are taking them in the street without proper dosing. And so they're harming themselves because
sure.
they're getting these like, and also mushrooms have a very wide variety of potency depending on the strain. And so people are taking things, they're getting hurt, they're doing stupid stuff, they're not educated properly. And so it's kind of like my duty to go talk about this stuff in the media because somebody needs to educate people because whether we like it or not, whether we want people to wait for them to be legal or not, people are taking these.
Yeah.
You know, like it's happening. And so I'm not telling you to go take them, but I am saying if you are taking them, you should definitely be careful with your brain.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. And that's the best way to put it, especially speaking right now, like you said, whether or not they're legal, someone needs to speak on safety,
Yeah.
right? How do we go about this?
Yeah. There's actually a website called psychedelic.support. And if you're like a therapist or a doctor, you can actually take a free course on harm reduction. And they have a fantastic like CME, continued medical education course on MDMA and psilocybin.
Is that the one you're
I'm
doing?
taking it right now.
I'm
It's
on
worth
it.
every penny.
I'm going to do it.
It's really, really worth it.
So speaking about those levels of experience, museum dose and the party, I notice anytime I take psilocybin, I don't want to be around people. I actually don't like it. I'd rather be in nature.
Yeah.
The first time I took it, I was like, oh, wow, like plants are alive. I get
Yeah.
it now. I get, everything's energetically connected.
Yeah.
But speaking about the higher dose, it's pretty incredible. Do you know what happens when you go at like 3, 4, 5 grams to the body? Is there a complete shutdown of that network and you're dissociating from the body? Because
I really wish, I mean, honestly, I'm going to have to get back to you. I don't want to talk about stuff that I'm not certain about. Like, it definitely seems like, there's a lot of research coming out about this, and I will know a lot more when I finish that part of the course.
Right, because what I notice is there's a shift in like
there's certainly a shift
observer.
in perception.
Yeah, like you are Dr. G.
There's got to be different facets of the brain function
Right.
because you're getting a higher and higher dose, and so there absolutely has to be a difference because I know that when I'm like, at least when I've done therapeutic experiences with psilocybin, there's an absolutely different experience when I have an eye mask on by myself with the doctor.
Completely. Completely. It's completely. I know that there's a mechanism part for the self-referential center, right?
Yeah.
I, me, ego, my experience, Christian, Dr. G.
Yeah.
And that's just off. And you're kind of left with some conscious observer of this experience. And it's wild when like to date, the most beautiful experience the most beautiful realization I've ever had in my life was hearing music. And it was I put together this like awesome playlist, right? And I'm very particular about curated music when I do these experiences.
Yeah, no, you have to.
Yeah, and this particular one had beautiful musical scores and symphonies. And I'm listening to it, and I was like, I came back to my body. I was like, that's a beautiful song. Wow, man. I was like, that artist did a beautiful. And I go, wait, the artist. I go, wait a minute. We have observer, Christian, artist, music. There's 2 mediums between. When I realized I am that music. The beauty of coming from that music is me. It completely changed my life because I understood if everything's connected, the artist made the music, I am the music that I'm observing. The music is beautiful, therefore I'm beautiful. I was like, holy shit. I was like, because then in your waking life, I'm sitting in front of you. I'm like, wow, she's so smart. And it's the same thing. It's like, I am you, you are me.
I know we are all one.
Yeah.
Like, this is the thing this is the big secret, is like, these psychedelics just open up the key to the door to realizing that we are all connected.
True
that
nature.
we are all one consciousness, and the universe is all connected. And there's this delusional idea that we're separate selves. And unfortunately, that's why so many people are miserable. It's because they like basically spend all this time stuck in their bodies, and then they're like, but I'm like alone here. So the first thing I would just say about that is like, loneliness is actually a hunger signal to bring you closer to the tribe because that would make you stronger and more likely to survive.
Yeah.
And most people don't realize that like loneliness is a functional like tool that's like, hey, this is a signal. You need to hang out with your friends. You need to be with people. You need to not be alone. And then the second thing is that like this idea of like being this this like version of ourselves, like it's so weird to like be in the media because I'm doing all this meditation and like the entire point of all this meditation that I do is like so that I can dissolve my ego, so that I can feel connected and be like one with everyone else. And it's so there's like this, I'm experiencing this like really strange thing where I'm constantly striving for like dissolving my ego, and then I'm also like a persona in the media, and I'm like, whoa, this is so weird. I can feel both of these states at the same
Yeah.
time. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely a interesting thing. I don't know if you have any friends who are like interested in like consciousness and stuff, but I'm sure you do. And like, I've got a bunch of friends who are like in persistent, non-symbolic, non-dual experience, which means that they never feel like they're an I anymore.
No.
They're
I
always
actually,
in a we.
I actually sometimes like
For me, it's a
go
sometimes
back and
thing.
forth. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not fully like crossed over to that new world, but like part of me is a little bit afraid because I'm like, what if I go to that other? I was talking to my friend Jeffrey Martin. If you haven't heard of his course, by the way, shameless plug, he's my friend. He teaches at Stanford with me. It's called the Finder's Course. He's like, Molly, when I like went from dual to non-dual, it's like I went from having the capacity of like 30 people like you to like capacity of one person. And it was like definitely a shift. I'm like, I'm not ready to give up this capacity.
Yeah.
So there is this little slight fear that like my whole life will fall apart if I just like go Zen and monk-like. But like at the same time, I'm pretty sure it's inevitable.
Well, you see, I'm happy you brought this up. After that same experience is where I was like, oh, I am music. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
At the end, I came out and I was like, all right, I have a choice. I can be like, what does it all matter? You know, like none of this is real.
Sure.
You know, the whole that whole narrative that you can go
sort
into.
of, the futile, sort of like nihilistic,
Nihilistic.
aspects. Yeah.
Because that's there, and
Yeah.
there are people who take psychedelics like
Oh,
you
sure.
know, irresponsibly and go there.
Yeah.
But the other part was like, I have this. It's like sort of a play, right? Like there's this character called Christian, and then there's another character called Dr. G, and I can show up accordingly, right? So it's not necessarily egoic; it's just creative experience. You get to create a Sims character, an avatar
exactly.
that you get to be, but
Totally.
really with the understanding that I am the conscious observer of this.
Totally.
Right? I'm not them. So
Yeah.
that's sort of the
just like
split.
everyone else is a conscious observer of this.
Right.
You know, it's like you are just part of that conscious observation of like, oh, there is a persona.
There's a persona,
You know?
exactly. But most people are
Yeah.
stuck believing that they are the persona.
I know.
And that's the suffering.
Totally.
That's the suffering, right? Because like, if you think you are your persona, all you need is one person to be like, I hate your persona, and you're like, oh my God, no, I am the persona. You know, this is my sense of self is threatened.
Yeah. That's why like identity, you just cannot let your identity be defined by like all of your work that you do. Like who you are is beyond the work that you do and like the place that you're from. It's like it's like the essence of who you are is just infinite, right? And so we have this idea that like we are these. I mean, I used to have these identity crises like every 10 years of my life, and then I realized like, oh yeah, all of that was because like society tells us that we have to like attach ourselves to these identities, and at the end of the day, like that makes us all miserable.
Yeah.
So like, why don't we just like construct these identities as they're useful for people, but like not be attached to them, you know, not be, and that's the key is like the non-attachment.
There you go. That's like that's what Buddhism is based on. Buddhism is non-attachment.
Yeah.
And again, that's like you said, we are in a society that actually values the identifications of whatever measures of success.
Hollywood, everything
yeah,
here.
We're in Hollywood.
Everything here. I'll tell you what, I started working with clients in Hollywood, and I definitely noticed a parallel between the Silicon Valley clients. I was like, wow, the more money people make, the more success that they get, the smaller their circles become, the more fearful they are of people, the less they trust others, the more obsessed they are with their reputations, the less they can actually enjoy what they've created. And it's like, oh, this is not good. So hopefully we can play a role in shifting some culture here because
I hope so.
You know, like that's what it's about is like we need to basically reignite this idea that like you're just like the amount of money in the bank that you have does not define you.
Yeah.
Of course it changes like your lifestyle, but it's not who you are.
Yeah.
It's not your value. It's not your actual net worth.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Yeah, I think, and that's why even before people start getting that net worth coming in, you know, they start making some good money. I think that's the most important part, to be grounded in who you are and understand, right?
Yeah.
I'm the same person before anything, you know, even before graduating school. I've always thought the same.
Yeah.
Because I don't identify, right?
Yeah.
Right. I'm just like, oh wow, here I am doing this now with my life, and here's another fun creative experience. So I think that like peeling away that identification is so important. Regardless, even like there's people listening that go, I never want to do psychedelics.
And that's okay.
But
You can
here's
meditate.
something you can do. Yeah, go through that meditation.
There's also, I mean, I've tripped so hard on my own neurochemistry meditating.
I know, you go deep, huh? Yeah, yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, I got trained by these like serious meditating groups of people that were like semi-cultish, but didn't get sucked into any cult. But I definitely was like, oh, this is kind of like a cult. But I'm like learning a lot. I'm going to try this on for a second.
Right. I just won't drink all the Kool-Aid.
I definitely didn't drink the Kool-Aid, but like I actually did. I once gave a talk with my friend Eric Weinstein about cults and counterculture and how like cults are actually really interesting, but you just don't want to stay. You just don't want to join the cult. But like you can learn a lot of things from cults. Sometimes they're useful. Meditation. I've been in 2 cult-like meditation groups, and both realms taught me like, oh my God, the power of your consciousness, what it can do without drugs is massive. Like you can totally hallucinate. You can totally like see things in your mind's eye, crystal clear with proper meditation if you want. Like if that's called what's called inner space technique. And you can also like completely silence and go completely dark internally and just have everything be completely still. Yeah. And then you can also have what's called samadhi, which is like just pure beauty, infinite intelligence, and just like it's like staring at the face of God. It's just so it's just like nirvana. Like that can be from meditation. So meditation is just like it's a consciousness expanding experience, whether it be something you use for focus and attention, or for healing your depression, or like traversing different worlds.
Whoa, whoa, so powerful. Yeah, so because there's a lot of people who are going to be like, all right, I'm not never doing that. It's such an interesting talk, but I'm not ready. Yeah. So the meditation part, or even like breath work. Have you? Oh my gosh, gone through breath work is you can get into that psychedelic experience. I went to
3 meditation retreats that involved breath work and meditation and yin yoga. And let me tell you, like after 10 days of that, you will be tripping on your brain. Right. Like breath work is amazing. Yeah. But like the reality is that it's funny because like no doctor is going to warn you about breath work or meditation, but they can cause psychotic breaks too. Yeah. So like if you are predisposed for psychosis, you should be much more careful with these techniques and tools. There's a lot of people who are really unstable psychologically. So I would recommend always find grounding and stability before you're about to like, because think about your consciousness like Castaneda. Have you ever read Castaneda? No. Carlos Castaneda is a great writer about consciousness, and just like, he's written some epic books. And so he kind of envisions like consciousness like a golden ball that you can like, if you close your eyes and think about your body and think about like where you're thinking about your consciousness is. Like right now I'm thinking about my consciousness in the middle of my forehead. Like imagine it's like a golden ball, and then like move that ball down to your toe. Like you can literally move your conscious focus of your mind to your toe if you just on demand. Like that is just it's just that to me, like if I want to think about my feet grounding into the earth, I can do that meditatively.
And you can feel it.
You can feel it, right? So, but if you're someone who's like kind of like not even in your body, like I know a lot of people who are kind of disembodied and they just don't feel totally grounded in reality. Like you go meditate and you do too much breath work and you can be a little bit thrown off, or some people a lot thrown off. I know people who've gone to meditation retreats and had major breakdowns afterwards. So especially like silent retreats, like
very difficult.
Talk about like you want to be challenged. Be by yourself and your thoughts for 10 days. Yeah, like, very difficult. You should really. It's like to me, it's like you're not going to go run a marathon usually without some training, right? So don't go do a 10-day meditation retreat without getting some practice. Yeah. That's the way it's just like microdosing versus macrodosing, right? It's like you don't have to be irresponsible with your consciousness. You can do things carefully and steadily, and then you will not hurt yourself.
Yeah, and have that patience behind it. Yeah. A lot of us are like, no, I'm going to go. There's a lot of all or nothing people. You got a lifetime
to work on this.
Yeah, you got a lifetime. But getting that groundedness is so important, and I love that you said we can do that before we jump in. Yeah. Because meditation can be super intense. Breath work can be, I've done it, can be super intense, put you in those psychedelic states. So,
and have tons of emotional release.
Yeah. And I've always been fascinated at how the parts of the brain turn off and we really come into the body where so much trauma is being held.
I know.
And one thing that the most fascinating thing is that how I'm just getting these like images or like really short videos or GIFs, as I say, during experiences, like in my mind's eye. And I'm like, Damn, I don't remember that happened in 1992, 93. What the heck? I completely
Yeah.
forgot about it. It's
Yeah.
just stored and just shown to
Mm-hmm.
you. And that's the magic. There's such an intelligence. Do you believe that there's an intelligence?
100%.
Could,
Like and the intelligence is actually like, it's funny because like I don't even think about it like from just a spiritual perspective.
yeah.
I think that there's actually, when you think about the way that the body is innervated, like the nerves, peripheral nerves, they go from the brain to the spinal cord out, but there's also like ganglia in your gut, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's these mini brains all over. There's a celiac plexus. There's this there's like a splenic plexus. There's all these different plexuses, and these are like these super highways of where all your nerves are crossing and communicating. And so there's a lot of stuff going on outside of the brain. And on top of that, your nerves, when they go out and they innervate, they go through your connective tissue.
Mm-hmm.
And so we used to think that connective tissue was just like this inert stuff. It's just inert tissue. I really believe, like along with a lot of other people, that it's like fiber optic cables. And there's a responsive mechanism happening when you get stressed and when someone hurts you and like you start hardening yourself, like you literally can feel those knots in your back when you are in a fight with someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can feel the emotion like getting stored in your body. That's your body's way of protecting you and trying to armor you against threats. So like when I get massage, I basically, when they're like working on specific knots, I'm like, okay, where did that knot come from? And I actually work with my own brain and consciousness to like be like, oh, that was that disagreement I had with that person.
Wow.
And like when you really work on your body with what's called body work or like somatic therapy, you can go really deep and you can figure out a lot of stuff about like why did you develop that kind of posture, like why did your body kind of develop that kind of positioning in order, and it's almost always to protect you,
Mm-hmm. Always. It's an
Yeah.
adaptive mechanism to
Yeah.
protect you, survival, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's like prolonged stress, it's still the mental survival
Think
of
about sitting
holding
at
you in.
desks all like this
Yeah.
is like terrible posture because this is like a very much like protected posture. Like we really want to open ourselves up, and so
Mm-hmm.
I'm just such a believer that people shouldn't just be working on the mind, like work with the body too,
Yeah.
like work with somatic
Yeah, and if we
therapists.
think about it, like I remember when I was in school, there was like there was a masseuse coming in, and one of my classmates had like a inner thigh, like deep massage. We're talking about like
Yeah.
it was borderline painful, and
Yeah.
out of nowhere she's like, it hurts, but it wasn't to the point where she's gonna cry. Boom, out of nowhere she's crying. It was a full release,
Yeah.
and I was like, what was happening in her
Yeah.
thigh? And
Yeah.
talking about connective tissue fascia, it's all those
Totally.
things that
Have you ever done Rolfing before?
yeah,
I mean, I've done it like at least 2 or 3 times.
Yeah,
Like
intense.
the full series. It's like changes your whole structure. It just changes
Yeah.
the way you carry yourself. It's
yeah,
amazing.
it's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
I love that the flow of this conversation. It's
know.
really cool. The so where do you see the aspect for all of psychedelics right now? How it is, how we're approaching it. Where is that in the next, let's say, 4 years, 3 years?
Well, the first thing is there's a massive land grab happening in pharma where like everyone's trying to patent everything. So there's just like we're gonna see just like this huge wave. I mean, there's this huge wave of just capital going into pharmacology. But there's also like a bunch of companies coming out and being made in like the realm of integration, for example. There's like one called Fluence and there's another one called Nana. And these are like integration companies that are literally like integration as a service. And so they're designed to help people work with the experiences that they're having, whether they're done on their own or through a clinic.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to see, field trip alone is going to open up 70, they say they're going to open up 75
Wow.
clinics across the country.
Wow.
So we're going to see a lot of stock soar. And I think that if you really want to invest your money in the stock market right now, it's like start learning about these companies, start learning about who runs them, start asking yourself, are you voting for this company? Do you like this company? Do you stand for what they're trying to do? Because we need to vote with our dollars. Like a lot of people are getting into stock investing and everyone's just like pouring money into these companies. But I really want to ask people like go out and like ask yourself like is this a company that I want to see flourish? And like then you put your money into that company's stock. I think that there's going to be a lot of people just coming out of this pandemic and they're going to want to have connection again. And so I think we're going to see another, I'm hoping we see a summer of love. I'm hoping everyone starts dating and I'm hoping that everyone decides that they want to have babies and
Yeah.
like our country, sees a rebirth of young people feeling happy and inspired about life. That's something I would like to see. I really want festivals to come back. But I'm attending some mini burns. So there's definitely like miniature things happening.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm pretty optimistic. I think that the movement's we're going to see MDMA approved. We're probably going to see psilocybin so one of the Compass will probably get it approved, but like I don't know how I feel about Compass yet because I don't really like what they're patenting. Like I think their patents are just a little bit ridiculous. But I mean, I think there's going to be sort of like first generation companies, which is like the existing substances like MDMA, psilocybin, ketamine, and then there's going to be these second generation companies that are going to be like new compounds, new delivery systems, safer routes of administration, safer ways to administer these medicines. So it's just kind of like the natural cycle of innovation, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm the early adopter, you're an early adopter. There's like the community leaders who are going to go out and spread the word. And then the early majority will be like, okay, I want to try this. And then the late majority is like, no, I'm not ready. And eventually late majority is going to be like, I'm miserable. I need something. And I think it's going to revolutionize psychiatry. So like I get a lot of messages from medical students and residents and they're just like, oh my God, I want to be like you someday. I'm like, first of all, my path is insane. You should probably not follow my path completely. But if you decide to go into medicine today, if I could go back to medicine, I would definitely go back into psychiatry because I think it's going to be the most exciting part of medicine like in the next 5 years. No
100%. 100%. I love that. I love this conversation.
Thanks.
I'm hyped up over here.
Me too.
How do people find you?
Well, I'm on Instagram at drmolly.co and I've got a website at drmolly.co. So it's www.drmolly.co. I've also got a medical practice. It's called Molly Maloof MD. And then mostly just like Twitter or Instagram or the
Clubhouse.
best. Clubhouse. Oh yeah, I'm the co-host of the Psychedelic News Hour on Clubhouse at 11:30 Pacific time, which I missed today because I was flying here.
I know. I was thinking about that. I was like, I wonder if she's in that.
There's no way for me to make it. So that's 11:30 Pacific time on Fridays. And we've got a website, the psychedelicnewshour.com, so you can check out the previous guests. And we're going to be posting our podcast on iTunes this year. And so that would be the best way to contact me. And then, LinkedIn. Friend me on all the social media.
I'm telling you, follow her. You're putting out some amazing and beautiful aesthetic posts. Where are you?
Oh, thank you.
I got to know your graphic,
I made it all myself.
We got a good graphic team, but yeah, it's beautiful. Like just the colors. It's like, it's got a little psychedelic vibe, it's science vibe.
Yeah.
I'm loving it. So thank you for coming on the show. Love to have you back in maybe a year. We talk about the progress.
Oh, yeah.
So that'd be really cool.
Totally.
And everyone, viewers, listeners, follow her. Look at all the information. You are leading the way, and very much so blessed to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
And this is where we're going. This is where we're going in medicine. What an incredible conversation with Dr. Molly. I love how she is so informed and so in tune and has a pulse on really where we're at with psychedelics in medicine and where we're going. And if you ask me as a practitioner and as an enthusiast of the changes that are being made in medicine, I do believe that there's going to be a major, major flood, a tidal wave, where we see that actually psychedelics are going to be so transcendent in people's healing that it's going to be saving a lot of lives. Remember, we don't know where we are yet. There's a lot of studies that need to be done. We're going to see. But I think that the prospect of them is amazing. Thank you for listening, rating, reviewing, subscribing, giving love. I will see you all next week. Much love to you.